Before the headline, before the arrest, before the body. Cycles that kill. The court of public opinion has already made its mind up about what the Karmelo Anthony case is about. For them, it's about race. It's about a Black teenager who killed a white teenager. It's about the justice system. It's about self-defense laws in Texas. It's about whether a shove justifies a stab. It's about whether 35 years is justice or cruelty. It's about everything except the question I actually want to answer, which is, why do people snap? That's right, I'm using what happened at that track meet in Frisco, Texas as the entry point into a conversation that this case desperately needs and is not getting anywhere else. Because here's the truth, this case is not unique. The specific names are unique, the specific location is unique, but the pattern underneath it, a minor confrontation, a weapon already in someone's possession, a split second, a death, that pattern is not new. It is not American, it is not Black, and it is not white. It's about fury and what builds it, and what homes produce a person who cannot find the space between feeling threatened and acting lethally on that feeling. Today, I'm going to show you 4 cases, 4 different locations, 4 demographic backgrounds, 1 pattern, and I'm going to give you clinical language to understand it. Welcome to Cycles That Kill. I'm Dr. Dylesia, and this is not about race. This is about rage. On this show, I use a framework called origin mapping. It's the practice of tracing a behavior, or in this case, a behavioral pattern across multiple cases, back to the conditions that produced it. Not to excuse what happened, but to understand what was built by whom and when. Today, we're origin mapping the 0 to 100 response to determine how a minor confrontation can become a fatality. How the moment when something that could have remained an argument, a shove, a heated exchange, a forgettable Tuesday, becomes a death. I want to be very clear about what I'm not doing. I'm not claiming to know the specific childhood histories of any of the individuals in these cases, but I am origin mapping a pattern, and I'm going to show you that pattern across 4 different contexts so that by the time we're done, the idea that Karmelo's story should be a story about race is not just challenged, it's clinically dismantled. I'm also going to introduce you to 3 clinical concepts, 1 per case, that explain the neuroscience and psychology underneath what you're watching when you see an impulsive response. And then I'm going to bring it home with the question that this show always asks. What did home have to do with it? Let's go. April 2025, Frisco, Texas, the 11 to 5A Championship District Track Meet. More than 100 students from 8 schools. It's raining, students are sheltering under their school's tents. 17-year-old Karmelo Anthony, a student at Frisco Centennial High School, is sitting under the tent belonging to Frisco Memorial High School. 17-year-old Austin Metcalf, a Memorial student, tells him he needs to move. What happens next is documented by multiple witnesses. Anthony opens his bag, reaches inside, and says, "Touch me and see what happens." Austin pushes him. Anthony pulls out a 3.5-inch Ozark Trail pocket knife and stabs Austin with the black blade once in the chest. Austin dies in his twin brother Hunter's arms. Since then, Karmelo has been convicted of murder and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Now here's what I want to focus on clinically, and I want to be precise because this is a part that gets lost in every conversation about this case. Karmelo came to that track meet with a knife already in his bag. That is not an impulsive decision made in the heat of a moment. The knife was already there, which means on some level, consciously or not, he arrived already prepared for a level of threat that a high school track meet does not ordinarily require preparation for. And when Austin said move, a request that in a neutral nervous system would register as an inconvenience at most, Anthony's system did not read it as an inconvenience. His first response was not to move. It was not to argue. It was to reach in his bag and make a threat. That is the moment I want to sit with, because that response tells us something about the internal threat assessment that was already running before Austin said a word. The clinical concept I want to introduce here is hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is what happens when someone's nervous system is chronically primed for threat, often because of what they experienced at home. When danger, unpredictability, or violence has been a consistent feature of someone's environment, the brain learns to scan constantly. It learns to read situations as threatening before there is evidence of threat. It learns to prepare for the worst because in the environment it was calibrated to, the worst was always a possibility. And here's the critical piece. When someone is hypervigilant, a minor confrontation does not register as minor. It registers as survival level danger. The response is disproportionate, not because the person is irrational, but because the internal threat assessment is calibrated to a completely different environment than the one they are currently standing in. Karmelo was at a track meet, but his nervous system may have been somewhere else entirely. Now, I'm not claiming to know where. What I'm saying is that a 17-year-old who arrives at a high school athletic event with a weapon and whose first response to being told to move is to reach into his bag for that weapon, that's a nervous system that's activated. And that activation did not happen at that track meet. It happened somewhere earlier, in a home, in a neighborhood, in an environment that this episode doesn't have documented access to, but that the pattern unmistakably points toward. Southampton, England, December 2025. 18-year-old Henry Nowak, a first-year accounting and finance student, is out with football teammates. He sees 23-year-old Vickrum Digwa, appears to notice a large blade, asks him if he's a bad person, and begins recording him. Vickrum takes the phone and Henry suffers 4 stab wounds. Police are called by Vickrum's brother, and when they arrive, Vickrum is there. He tells them he is the victim and claims Henry, who is white, attacked him, a sick man, in a racist assault. Police take him at his word. They cuff Henry, the dying man, while Vickrum stands nearby. Henry dies handcuffed on a driveway. At trial, the court determines that Vickrum lied. There was no racist attack. Based on video evidence, Henry was not the aggressor. Vickrum was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 21 years. Now, the internet made this case about policing, about whether the officer should have believed Digwa's account, about institutional bias and race and how police respond to competing narratives. And those are real questions, just like the questions raised around Karmelo's case about white threat and equitable sentencing. They all deserve real answers. But I want to go somewhere different, because what Digwa did after the stabbing, the story he constructed, the narrative he built, the specific claim that he was the one under threat, that is clinically interesting to me in a way that has nothing to do with whether police believed him. The concept I want to introduce here is threat perception distortion. Threat perception distortion is what happens when chronic exposure to danger, instability, or unpredictability fundamentally changes how the brain reads situations. Not just in moments of confrontation, but in the stories our mind constructs around conflict after it happens. Sometimes threat perception distortion looks like confusion, but sometimes it shows up as a very specific, very detailed story about why and how you were the one in danger. Because when your nervous system has been calibrated to threat for so long, when danger has been the default setting of your internal world since childhood, you do not just misread situations in real time. You reconstruct them automatically in a way that confirms what your nervous system has already decided is true. That you're always the one at risk. That you're always the one who had no choice. That the world is always coming for you. The lie Digwa told police may have been the lie he told himself first. Not because he's a liar, not because he had a cynical plan, but because a mind that has been organized around threat for long enough genuinely cannot access a neutral read of a situation. It rewrites the confrontation in real time to confirm the threat it already expected. Like hypervigilance, threat perception distortion doesn't emerge out of nowhere. It gets built, often in home environments where danger was real, consistent, and unpredictable enough that the brain learned to see it everywhere, including in places it was not. Ottawa, Canada, July 26, 2021. 19-year-old Eric Hewer is out celebrating his birthday and a new job with a friend. They're in a black Volkswagen. 3 teenagers are riding e-scooters. Eric's friend, the driver, makes what police later describe as a driver error. And then the two groups engage in 20 blocks of continuous back and forth confrontation, cutting each other off and verbally assaulting one another while still on the scooters and inside the vehicle. After the 3 teens begin making gestures threatening to throw rocks at the vehicle, Eric and his friend get out of the car. They begin to tussle, and it ends with Eric stabbed in the stomach and through the heart. He dies almost instantly, on his birthday. He had just moved to Ottawa to start a new job. Ottawa police investigated for over a month and ultimately determined that the 16-year-old who stabbed Eric had acted in self-defense. No charges were filed. Eric's brother Brendan said something in an interview that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I read it. He said, "I do believe that if that person was not carrying a knife that day, this simply would have been an assault charge. probably on both people because everybody had an opportunity to leave and everybody pursued one another. Eric was just the one that paid the ultimate price. Everybody had an opportunity to leave. Everybody pursued one another. That sentence is the clinical picture. Both groups escalated, both groups pursued, nobody left, and one person died because of it. The clinical concept I want to introduce here is rage dysregulation, which is a specific form of emotional dysregulation. Emotional dysregulation means the system for managing emotional responses is not calibrated to the size of what is actually happening. We've talked about that before on this show. Rage dysregulation is more specific. It describes what happens when anger, specifically the anger response, has no internal brake. When the escalation from irritation to rage to action happens so fast and so completely that the window for a different choice closes before the person can access it. Everybody had an opportunity to leave. That is true, logically, rationally, in a nervous system that can access that window. Yes, both groups could have left. The incident was not inevitable. There were multiple off-ramps. But rage dysregulation removes the off-ramp. Not because the people are evil, not because they decided to stay and fight, but because the anger response fired so completely that part of the brain, the part that evaluates options, that says, we could just go, this isn't worth it, nobody needs to get hurt tonight, that part goes offline. And what was left was pure activation with no break. Rage dysregulation is a learned response. It often develops in home environments where anger was modeled as the appropriate and often only response to feeling threatened or disrespected, where de-escalation was not demonstrated, where the adults in the home did not show children what it looks like to feel provoked and choose not to act on it, where conflict resolution was not a concept that existed in the household vocabulary. Eric Hewer is dead because nobody in that confrontation on either side had a fully functioning break. And wherever those breaks were supposed to come from, they didn't come from. Just like in the cases prior to this one, each of the victims were aggressors in some way. Austin told Karmelo to move, Henry filmed Vickrum, and Eric physically pursued the teen who killed him. They started the quote-unquote it and were ultimately unlucky that their victims had knives. Of course, it's more common to have weapons on the street than at a school event, which is a factor shaping Karmelo's outcome. But for me, the question is, what drives us to bring knives to fistfights? Oakland Park, Florida, August 25, 2025. 14-year-old Jordan Dowdy and 16-year-old Ruben Whitworth are roommates at a ChildNet-operated group foster home on Northeast 3rd Avenue. Both boys are there because their families of origin could not provide better environments for them to grow up in. Jordan's father was actually serving time in prison when Jordan was killed. 2 weeks before the murder, Jordan offered Ruben mozzarella sticks. Ruben told him to shut up or he would stab and kill him. Jordan's mother heard about the threat. She warned ChildNet, the agency responsible for her son's care, but nothing was done. On August 25th, the two boys argued over chores. Ruben armed himself with a knife he had concealed in his waistband, pushed past multiple people, forced his way into Jordan's room, and stabbed him at least 7 times, including in the chest. A caretaker tried to keep Jordan conscious while waiting for paramedics. He was pronounced dead at Broward Health Medical Center shortly before 6 p.m. Ruben was charged as an adult with first-degree murder. Now I want to bring in the fourth and final concept of this episode. And this one is not a clinical term. This one is the question that this entire show is built around. What must a mother have modeled about how to respond when you feel disrespected or threatened to lead to a bloody murder like this? What must a home environment have taught a child about the acceptable range of responses to conflict for a teen to admit that he wasn't acting in self-defense when he killed his roommate, rather the desire to kill him? Both of these boys were in foster care, which means both of them came from homes that had already failed them before they ever walked into that group home. Jordan Dowdy's father's criminal history is documented. His mother's experience of domestic violence and convictions for child neglect of he and his 8 siblings is also documented. The environment Jordan came from and the environment that sent him into the foster care system was one where conflict had consequences that looked nothing like conversation. And Ruben Whitworth, we do not have any documented information about his specific family history, but we know he was in foster care. We know he had already threatened to stab and kill a roommate over mozzarella sticks 2 weeks before he followed through on it. We know that the threat was documented and reported and nothing was done. And we know he had a knife concealed in his waistband on a Monday afternoon in a foster home. That is not a child who arrived at 16 without a history. That is a child whose history sent him to a group home. A child who learned somewhere in whatever home or homes preceded that one, that a knife in your waistband at home is a reasonable thing to carry. That threatening to stab someone over an offer of food is a proportionate response. That when you feel disrespected, you don't use your word. You use the weapon you tucked in your waistband for a moment like this. The maternal angle I want to sit with here is not about blame, it's about transmission. Because every child who arrives at a group home carrying a knife and a pattern of lethal threats got that pattern from somewhere. And that somewhere is almost always a home. And in that home is almost always a mother, or the absence of one. And whatever that mother modeled or failed to model about conflict and threat and the acceptable range of responses to feeling upset, that is what is running in that child when an argument over chores becomes 7 stab wounds. That kind of cycle does not start in a foster home. It moves through foster homes. It starts somewhere earlier in a home with a mother, with whatever that mother was taught before she became one. Let me pull it together now, because I want you to see what I see when I look at these 4 cases side by side. Frisco, Texas, a black teenager and a white teenager, a track meet, a tent, a knife, already in a bag, ready to go. Hypervigilance, a nervous system calibrated to a level of threat that a high school athletic event does not require. A minor confrontation read as survival level danger, a death. Southampton, England, a sick man and a white university student, a residential street, a confrontation, a stabbing, and then a story, a very specific story about who was really the victim. Threat perception distortion, a mind so organized around the expectation of threat that it reconstructed the confrontation in real time to confirm what it already believed, a death. Ottawa, Canada, a birthday, e-scooters, a driver error, 2 groups who pursued each other over several blocks when every single one of them could have gone home. Rage dysregulation, the absence of a break between feeling provoked and acting on it. Nobody de-escalated, a death. Oakland Park, Florida, 2 boys in foster care, both failed by their families of origin before they ever met. A threat made over mozzarella sticks, a warning ignored, a knife in a waistband on a Monday afternoon. The maternal model of conflict transmitted not through words, but through everything home taught about what to do when someone makes you feel small. A death. Different races, different countries, different ages, different contexts, same pattern. Hypervigilance, threat perception distortion, rage dysregulation, and the maternal model of conflict that produced all 3. This is not about race, even though race is a factor woven so deeply into the criminal justice system that we can never responsibly ignore its impact on violence, conviction, sentencing, or the intergenerational transmission of criminal behavior. This is about what gets built in homes by the people who are supposed to teach children what the world is and how to move through it. And when that teaching is absent, or when it transmits the wrong thing, or when it transmits only what was transmitted to the parent before they became a parent, this is what it produces. Not always, not inevitably, but consistently enough that 4 cases with 4 different backgrounds tell the same story. I want to turn the lens before I close, because the whole point of this show is that these patterns do not only live in courtrooms and crime scenes. They live in bodies, in homes, in the way we move through the world when someone cuts us off in traffic, or says something dismissive in a meeting, or makes us feel small in a room full of people. Hypervigilance. Do you walk into rooms already scanning? Do you read neutral situations as threatening? Do you find yourself braced for something to go wrong before anything has gone wrong? That's not paranoia. That is a dysregulated nervous system, and it became your guiding force before you were old enough to even question it. Threat perception distortion. Do you find yourself constructing stories about confrontations after they happen? Stories where you were clearly the one under threat, clearly the one who had no choice, clearly the one who was pushed into a corner. Do those stories feel more true than whatever the other person experienced? That's not gaslighting. That is a mind that has been organized around threat for so long that it cannot access a clean situational read, even in retrospect. Rage dysregulation. Do you lose the off-ramp? Does anger come on so fast and so completely that by the time you realize how intense it is, you're already deep inside it? Do you find yourself escalating situations that you know in the calm part of your mind did not require escalation? That break that I kept talking about in reference to Ottawa, does yours work? And if it doesn't, where did you learn that it wasn't safe to? Affirmative answers to these questions don't destine you to the fates of Karmelo Anthony or Vickrum Digwa or Ruben Whitworth, but they do point at the same childhood experiences. And what you can name, you can change, while what you cannot or refuse to name keeps moving. Before I go, I want to honor 4 people. Austin Metcalf, 17 years old, he died in his twin brother's arms at a high school track meet. Henry Nowak, 18 years old. He died handcuffed on a driveway in Southampton. Eric Hewer, 19 years old. He died on his birthday on a street in Ottawa after a confrontation that everyone could have walked away from. And Jordan Dowdy, 14 years old. He died in a foster home where his mother had already warned someone that this was coming. 4 young men, 4 families that will never be the same, 4 instances of a pattern that nobody interrupted early enough. Their deaths deserve to mean something beyond the verdict, beyond the sentence, beyond the social media debate about race and justice and who pushed who first. They deserve to be the reason someone acknowledges something today, in themselves, in their home, in the child that they're raising right now. Because the cycle that produced every one of these moments started long before the moment, and it will keep producing moments like this until someone decides it stops here. That's what this show is for. New episodes of Cycles That Kill drop every week. If this episode hit you somewhere real, share it, leave a review on Apple, and come back next week. I'm Dr. Dylesia. This is Cycles That Kill. See you next time.